really what was motivating people to write these things down was to say, we cannot ever have this happen again. It's happened twice. So you have to kind of come up with a set of rules that we can just, get rid of war altogether, or to do something to really mitigate it. And I think the impetus behind, the series of, the international law, starting from Kellogg-Briand all the way through, was different. In the case of, I mean, the principles were the same, and I think that's it's an interesting parallel, because for the Muslims, this forms part of their religious sacred law. And I think that often gets lost sight of. In other words, war for Muslims is not, it's not as though there's the law here and then there's ritual and then there's war or something like that. It's part of the law. In a sense, it's a transaction, so it has to, it's a relation between people, so it becomes part of the religious law. And in that respect, it's different. But considering who the major powers were who were creating those international agreements, I mean, I would hazard a guess to say that there wasn't much direct. Maybe someone might find something like that, I don't know, but I don't think so. Well, the point I was trying to make was that those kinds of actions are contingent. That it's not under all circumstances that a person should be allowed to resort to force. But it's only the purest pacifist who says that I will never exert the use of force. And so then the question becomes, what is the minimum criterion for the exertion of the use, to actually pick up a weapon and use it? And then what is the maximum extent to which I'm allowed to actually do something like that? So, the kind of pure aggression and warlikeness and versus pure pacifism. I mean, Islam, like basically every other, equivalent of just war theory that we know of, has to operate within those bounds. And what I was trying to get at was that, in my reading of it, I mean, this can be disputed, my understanding was that at least in the very early period, and amongst the first generation, and surely amongst later generations, there was a consciousness that it wasn't conquest for conquest's sake. It wasn't conquest for the sake of glory or something like that, or glory in the worldly sense. Maybe you could speak of God's glory. But that there was a sense that, given the very particular and specific political situation in which the Arabs found themselves, and I want to insert here that it wasn't, I mean, there's this kind of popular conception that Arabia was just completely cut off from the rest of the world, and it wasn't connected. It was very much connected with the ancient world. I mean, it was part of the ancient, it was, the Persians, the Byzantines, the Egyptians, I mean, it was all part of a world. Some of the companions owned land in Palestine, and I mean, it was all very interconnected. And the great empires were very much aware of what was going on in the Arabian Peninsula. And it was very plausible, I mean, if you want to look at it from an objective point, it's very plausible on the part of the Muslims, considering everything that had happened up until the death of the Prophet and all the, the kind of the persecution that they suffered. It was very, I think, plausible to say that they looked at the world and said, if we just if we stay like we are right now, they're going to gobble us up sooner or later. And so we need to sort of push out. And hence that saying, when you don't campaign against the Byzantines, they will campaign against you. And it's kind of pre-UN chart. Now today we're in a situation where every country is in treaty with every other country. That's revolutionary and quite a positive development. But it wasn't the case in the pre-modern period. War was a legitimate policy. Unless you had a treaty, you could expect someone was going to invade you. And so it's within that framework, not naked aggression, not pure pacifism, but how do you sort of operate within those bounds?
Thank you, Samaya. And thank you to all of you who are here. And I also want to begin by thanking the organizers of the conference, everyone who is associated with the Ali Vural Ak Center, and for all your efforts into putting this together. It is often popularly assumed that martyrdom, especially in the military sense, is fundamental to the Islamic worldview, and therefore it must be a well-developed concept in the Qur'an. But a firm acquaintance with the Qur'an reveals that martyrdom is an inchoate concept within it, not being encapsulated by any single specific term. The term shaheed, used almost exclusively in later literature to refer to a martyr, particularly in the military sense, does not occur in the Qur'an in this sense. Shaheed and its cognate shahid refer in the Qur'an to a legal or eyewitness and it is used for both God and humans in appropriate contexts. For example, Qur'an 398, 619, 4153. Quranic phrases commonly understood to refer to the military martyr include man qutila fi sabilillah or alladhina qutilu fi sabilillah, those who are slain in the path of God, in Quran 2154, 3169, and variations thereof. These phrases are therefore not without ambiguity and do not clearly refer to the military martyr, although the Quranic context for a number of verses employing this phrase suggested, as does the exegetical literature. In order to retrieve some of the earliest meanings assigned to being slain in the path of God, this paper will focus on a discussion of two critical Quranic verses, Quran 2154 and 3169, which employ this expression or a variant thereof, based on a survey of their exegeses by some of the most important Quran commentators through time. In this presentation, I'm looking only at Sunni works on tafsir, firstly, due to length constraints, and secondly, due to the fact that martyrdom acquired certain connotations exclusive to the Shiite tradition and would require a separate treatment. The principal Sunni exegetical works consulted here is the early commentary composed during the Umayyad period by Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, who died in 150 or 767, the early tafsir of Abdul Razak as-San'ani, who died in 211, 827, the acclaimed commentary of At-Tabari, who died in 310 or 923, the commentaries of the Mu'tazili exegete Az-Zamakhshari, who died circa 538 or 1144, the Ash'ari exegete Fakhruddin al-Razi, who died 606 or 1210, and finally the Andalusian exegete Al-Qurtubi, died 671 or 1273. Let me now go on to the exegeses of these two verses. Quran 2154 states, "Do not say regarding those who are slain in the path of God that they are dead. Rather, they are alive, but you are not aware." Quran 3169 states, "Do not consider as dead those who are slain in the path of God. Rather, they are alive and well provided for in the presence of their Lord." With regard to Quran 2154, the early Umayyad exegete Muqatil ibn Sulaiman says that it was revealed in regard to the 14 Muslims who were slain at the Battle of Badr, 8 from among the Ansar and 6 from among the Muhajirun. According to Muqatil, the revelation of this verse served to inform the believers that those who were slain in the path of God were not dead but alive, reaping their reward in paradise in the presence of God. The souls of the martyrs, and he uses the word ash-shuhada, reside near the lotus tree Sidratul Muntaha, closest to the throne of God. As for Quran 3169, Muqatil comments it was also revealed concerning those killed in the Battle of Badr, who are not to be regarded as dead but alive, enjoying the fruits of heaven, as-thimar. God renders the souls of the martyrs as green birds which flit about in heaven under candelabra suspended over the divine throne. When they alight on these candelabra, God appears before them and asks them if he can provide for anything more. He asks the same question of them 3 times. On the 3rd occasion, they wish aloud that the souls could be returned to their bodies, so that, and I quote, "we may fight in your path again." On having experienced God's generosity towards them, they wish to go back and inform their brethren of the joys that await them, and that if they should encounter fighting, they should hasten themselves towards martyrdom. Sario bi anfusihim ila shahada. Upon which God informed them that he was about to reveal 3169 to his prophet so that he may inform their brethren about their situation. This actually becomes the kind of the universal sabab al-nuzul, the occasion of revelation for this verse. In his early tafsir work, Abdur Razzaq says, in reference to Qur'an 2:154, that the souls of the martyrs are in the form of white birds. He relates from Ma'amar that Al-Kalbi was of the opinion that they were in the form of green birds, eating from the fruits of paradise and taking refuge in the candelabra under the divine throne. Abdur Razzaq cites similar reports in regard to Qur'an 3:169. According to Ma'amar, relating from Qatada, the souls of the martyrs are in the form of white birds eating the fruits of paradise. He then cites the report from Al-Kalbi, related by Ma'amar, as just noted, which depicts the souls in the form of green birds. It kind of goes back and forth between the color of the birds in this case. In At-Tabari, we find a much more detailed landscape of the next world and a more extensive taxonomy of the type of heavenly rewards awaiting specific categories of believers, indicating the extent to which this issue had begun to exercise the minds of the exegetes by the late 3rd, 9th century. At-Tabari begins by commenting that in this verse, God addresses the believers and exhorts them to seek his help, while patiently obeying him in their jihad against their enemies, forsaking all that constitutes disobedience to him, and in carrying out the rest of their religious obligations. They're also commanded not to say regarding those who are slain in the path of God that they are dead, mayyit, for the dead are lifeless and deprived of their senses, unable to enjoy pleasures and experience bliss. Rather, and I'm quoting now, those among you and from the rest of my creation who are killed in the path of God are alive in my presence, immersed in life and bliss, enjoying a happy existence and glorious provisions, exulting in what I have bestowed on them of my bounty and conferred on them my generosity. End of quote. At-Tabari then quotes Mujahid, the early exegete Mujahid ibn Jabr, who understood this verse as referring to those who are alive in the presence of their Lord and partaking of the fruits of heaven and enjoying its fragrance, even though they're not actually within heaven. According to Qatada, the souls of the martyrs, again he uses the word ashuhada, take the form of white birds, tayr bid, who eat the fruits of heaven and reside in the celestial lotus tree, Sidrat al-Muntaha. He, that is Qatada, says that there are 3 possible outcomes for the one who fights in the path of God, and the phrase used is lil mujahid fi sabilillah. Firstly, one who is killed in the path of God remains alive and provided for, sara hayyan marzuqan. Secondly, one who survives, having been granted victory and compensated with a great reward, ajran aziman. And thirdly, one who dies, that is of natural causes, is also given a handsome provision, rizqan hasanan, by God. According to the companions Rabi'a and Ikrimah, the souls of the martyrs take the form of green birds in heaven. But what if someone remonstrates, continues At-Tabari, that the generous compensation promised to the one who is slain in the path of God, and he uses the original Quranic phrase, al-maqtul fi sabilillah, is also generally applicable to any pious believer. After all, as At-Tabari notes, a number of reports record how the Prophet Muhammad distinguished the states of the believer and the unbeliever in general in the following manner. In the case of the believers, the doors of their graves would be opened towards heaven so that they may smell its fragrance. They further implore God to hasten the last hour so that they may hasten towards their dwellings in paradise and be reunited with their families and children there. As for the unbelievers, the doors of their graves are open towards the fire, and they smell its putridness and its vile odors while gazing at it. They seek to delay the last hour, fearful of the grievous fate that God has prepared for them. So At-Tabari's interlocutor may well ask, what, if anything, distinguishes the state of the one killed, al-qatil, in the path of God from the rest of humanity, believers and unbelievers, who, according to these reports, are all alive in barzakh, that is, in the intermediary world, after death, between this one and the next, albeit in vastly different conditions. The answer to this question is as follows, says At-Tabari. The martyrs are distinguished from other believers by the fact that they alone are privy to the delicious food of heaven in barzakh before their resurrection, and which they continue to savor after their resurrection. This is how God has privileged them over everyone else. According to a report from Ibn Abbas, the martyrs are near Bariq, a river at the gate of paradise, in a green dome where they are given their provision from heaven morning and night. At-Tabari then proceeds to reply to those who protest that these reports cited by him cataloging the pleasures awaiting the martyrs are not mentioned in Qur'an 2:154, which merely gives information about their state, whether they're dead or alive. At-Tabari replies by simply asserting that these reports give information about the pleasures enjoyed by the martyrs, alluded to by God in the related verse Qur'an 3:169, which refers to their provision. In Qur'an 2:154, says At-Tabari, God forbids humankind to say that the martyrs are dead and does not mention details that are provided in these reports. The last part of Qur'an 2:154 refers to the fact that humans cannot see the martyrs and are therefore not aware that they are indeed alive. They are apprised of this only through God informing them of this fact, says At-Tabari. With regard to Qur'an 3:169, At-Tabari understands it to contain a reference specifically to those companions killed at Uhud. The verse served to inform the Prophet that he should not regard them as dead, that is devoid of feeling and the ability to feel pleasure. Rather, he comments, this verse is tantamount to God saying, and I quote, "They are alive in my presence